chapter 1146. And let's appreciate one more time the fact that the One Piece anime is once again releasing episodes weekly alongside the manga, and this week's episode is going to showcase the first part of Luffy vs Kizaru in full swing, following the Sentomaru fight, which was really well done in its own right, and fittingly there's a lot of focus on individual fights in this chapter as well, opening with the cover story. And all of my rambling over the past few months has not been for naught, because exactly as I thought, Ulti now wants to serve under Yamato for saving her and her younger brother who she loves so much, maybe too much, and maybe it's a twisted sort of love, but that's not important here because I am vindicated, and she's obviously gonna force that younger brother Page One to go along with this no matter what he thinks. So this was the thing to crack Ulti's crazy exterior. Her love for Page One transcends even her own personality, I guess. This isn't to say Yamato is going to accept them though, because they have definitely had their own differences in the past. Wano made that crystal clear, and I do think Yamato is going to turn them down, refuse to take them under her wing. But this is where the Oden parallels come back into play, because in the same way he toured the country on his own and collected followers who would then go on to become his retainers who followed him against his will to begin with, I'm sure that's exactly what's going to happen here. They're going to tag along anyway, and the two siblings are still technically criminals even though they were victims in this particular scenario, so that's also something. And again, I'm a big fan of that dynamic or parallel in its own right of Ulti and Page One following the child of the man who took them in after their father Hanafuda died. Also, I'm still going to be hoping for that Tama Ulti interaction. Will Ulti apologize for what she did to Tama during Wano? That would genuinely be a big moment for her given her characteristics, but it makes me think now, will Yamato pick up any more of her own retainers on this voyage? We're still in Unan, I'm pretty sure, which was the last place we saw King and Queen. I do want to see them again, King more so for obvious Joyboy and Lunarian based reasons. He's probably got the most understandable reasoning out of anyone to join Yamato if he was to actually do it. What if she just ends up going around collecting the Tobiropo like they're Pokemon or something? The chapter opens where we left off, Gunko on top of the column pirate ship, and she's still making sure everyone knows she's above them after Nami calls her one of the human intruders, which she does correct. You can either view this as her acting exactly as a celestial dragon would act, all high and mighty, or you can view this as her trying extra hard to convey the fact that she is a celestial dragon by constantly puffing her chest out as if she may be compensating for the fact that she isn't one and she's actually a member of the Revolutionary Army. I don't think so. I'm almost 100% sure that she is a celestial dragon through and through, and with the way she's talking about the kids and taking them to Marige while the crew catches on that she is a celestial dragon, but also notice that she's different from the usual ones. And really unexpectedly, Brooke outright suggests that she may be a member of the Holy Knights. So let's theorize here, because I was not anticipating any of these guys to know about the Holy Knights apart from maybe Jinbei because of his life experience and time as warlord, but instead it's Brooke. And I'll build on an existing theory that Brooke and the Rumbao pirates were taken out by the Rocks pirates, because it's the only time I can think of where Brooke could have learned about them. So this is gonna be a stretch, and I have no clue if it works within the existing timeline, but what if the Rocks pirates weren't the ones who took them out, but it was the Holy Knights who did, and obviously they wouldn't descend to the lower world for such a random pirate crew. So what if this was the first time the Holy Knights went after the Rocks pirates, because there's already existing implications that Rocks had some sort of knowledge of Emu and the truth of the world. So what if they were after him and the Rumbao pirates were just unfortunate enough to cross paths with them? Brooke can't just pull their group's name out of thin air, and the only way I can think of that he knows who they are, that they exist, is if they were the ones who killed him and his crew. And Gunko, she has a very interesting speech here where she talks about how the world was supposed to suddenly disappear, simply vanish, and some translations more explicitly say without anyone knowing, but that was discovered by the likes of Clover, Olvia and Vegapunk, who were able to warn everyone else. So my first thought was this is something to do with that great cleansing that the elders mentioned when Emu made their first appearance. Although revisiting that scene, it sounded a bit like they were maybe talking about a specific target or something more closely resembling what happened to Lelucia, and also that was in the present, 2 decades after the Ohara incident. However, it could be possible that Clover and Olvia's findings might have delayed that great cleansing, if that is what Gunko is talking about. Another possibility is that Emu and those guys have been wanting to bring in the 4th world, because the mural is very much something that's in favor of our our side, you know, especially the third world basically talking about the world's liberation. I'm sure Emu would not agree with that, nor do they think that's how things are going to go down. They definitely have their own version of events of what will occur in the future, one of which could be bringing in the fourth world. Maybe this fourth world idea and the great cleansing idea are one and the same, and maybe it's as simple as Emu straight up spamming the mother flame all across the world. The Holy Knights are a lot more in the know than I was expecting them to be. Like, I thought they would be kind of perfectly sandwiched in between the average celestial dragons and the elders, but in actual fact they seem to be a lot closer to the elders. Who knows if they've always been this knowledgeable about such important information, or maybe after Garling was promoted he gave the group greater meaning, made them more in the loop with that sort of stuff. They were probably always this integral, I think, since Dragon specifically has targeted them, and the without anyone knowing part would mean anyone who isn't Emu, an elder, or a holy knight. But even then they might have known it was coming, but they wouldn't have known when. So any random day Emu could have decided they're feeling good that particular morning, and they could have chosen that very moment to end the world, and the end of the world would happen everywhere except for Marijwa atop the red line, with Emu being able to come out of the shadows and the celestial dragons probably repopulating the world amongst themselves, which is a horrible image and a horrible future, but obviously one that's not going to happen. Gunko also mentions the immense war that's gonna engulf the whole world, so again we need to ask, how much did Whitebeard actually know? Did he ask more from Roger than simply just the meaning of the Will of D, or is the Will of D so vital to this world that when Whitebeard asked about it, Roger basically had to tell him everything he learned to give him the full context behind the meaning of the initial? Or did Roger not reveal everything, but Whitebeard was just able to fill in the blanks by himself, because I do think he would have been smart enough to do so. Plus it kind of makes the image of him sitting beside the throne and never on it take on a second meaning. The first meaning obviously being how his treasure was his family, so he never went after the One Piece or Pirate King title, and the second one would be, you know how people talk about Shanks acting as a guardian to Loftail and the One Piece? That sounds exactly like what Whitebeard would have been doing in this situation if this hypothesis were to be true. But also that means the final war hasn't begun yet, so you know, my headcanon of this fight being the first battle of the final war has officially been shut down. And finally Gumko mentions it's worth asking who the giants would follow during that war, so that clears up that the core of this mission of bringing the giants under the world government was to have that great power on their side for the war. And she talks about it as if their allegiance would be up in the air, although from everything we've learned about the giants throughout the story, and most importantly through the mural, the giants look to be very firmly rooted on our side, on Joyboy's side. The only thing we've learned previously that suggests otherwise is the giant interpretation of Nika, where because some view him as a destroyer, then from their perspective obviously that doesn't sound like someone they would want to side with. However, I think that this small section of Gunko's words is very nicely answered at the end of the chapter. And on the topic of fights, we get to see Gunko actually fight properly against opponents who aren't heavily chained up and restrained, but she does walk the walk because she is strong. We get each of the present Straw Hats trying their luck and launching attacks, all of which Gunko redirects back against them, so her abilities just get more versatile the more we learn about them, and it's offering some really funny moments like Nami and Brook posing after Brook took the redirected Thunder Shock, which is a really cool new attack from Nami by the way, and also her trying to pull the arrow away physically from Usopp. And speaking of Usopp, he's making his presence felt and he does land an explosive attack on her which messes her up. However, just like the elders, she is also able to completely regenerate her body, so by extension it's safe to assume that the other Holy Knights can do the same. It's soft confirmation that it's Emu's abilities that are making this possible, but it's still not clear whether the regeneration is still directly tied to Emu, as in these regenerative abilities are directly linked to Emu's level of stamina, their state, and obviously right now Emu's not doing anything except for playing with Butterfly, so the regeneration can be used at will. Or is it more like Emu gave them the ability and it's now their own, it's not connected to Emu at all, aside from the fact that they can take it all away just like we saw with Saturn. Another thing is that, and this was spoken about during Egghead with Saturn and Co as well, where as soon as a character is revealed to have hyper regenerative abilities, they suddenly become a lot easier to hit, they take a lot more damage that they can then easily recover from, and in this case it's Usopp, who is obviously nowhere near Gunko's level of power, but he was still able to do that much. From my perspective, I feel like it's to do with what's the point of hiding it. Like Egghead was the first time we saw Saturn in action and he used the regeneration, and it's the same with Gunko here, who's fighting properly for the first time and is using the regeneration straight away. If they have the power, why not use it? But also then what's the point in wasting their stamina by using Haki to defend an attack that they can quickly heal from anyway? Although I will add, we don't know how much the regeneration affects their stamina either, which would connect back to how Imu is involved in all of this, whether it depends on Imu themselves or the actual person. But in the end, she completely dominates these guys, even with Jinbei here. Man, poor Jinbei, you know, he joined the crew right at the moment where they would begin fighting the strongest characters in the world. They've gone from the Beast Pirates to the 5 Elders to the Holy Knights, but I guess that's what he signed up for, even if he is losing. Remember what he said to Big Mom, he's gonna be on the crew of the future king of the pirates. So even if he is getting his ass handed to him at the moment, I'm still happy he's here. And on a side note, Gunko has no visible reaction to Brook being there, so either she genuinely actually does not care at all who wrote the songs that she is listening to, or she is doing a very good job at keeping her private and professional lives separate. Everyone says a good work-life balance is key, so maybe she's been able to achieve just that. Another prediction has come to pass where Colin himself has been kidnapped. And with the way that the chapter ends the state of the battle so far, the next phase is definitely gonna be Gaban fighting the Holy Knights after being able to sense them for so long, which works well with Colin being at stake here. And to add to Gaban fighting them, I think he will be the one who showcases the way to bypass their regen. Like how Rayleigh was the first to overcome the Logia powers, Kizaru specifically, in Sabaody with his Haki. Gaban could do something similar here, cause Egghead was a retreat on both sides, without being able to damage the elders, who fell back after feeling Joyboy's Haki, which did scare them out of their skin, but it didn't damage them. So Gaban feels like the right guy to reveal how to deal with them, because again, that's another link back to God Valley where he would have fought the Holy Knights back then as well, so it would make complete sense for him to know how to handle them. I have my own theory, or a couple theories for how it would work. The first is that it has something to do with Ryo, how Ryo is sending Haki into the target, so instead of just the regular external hits, maybe some internal damage would do something different. The other theory links actually to Black Blades and the rope that Emmet had that contained Joyboy's Haki. It's to do with not only getting the Haki inside of that thing, whether it's an object or a being, it's about the Haki staying there. So say Gaban imbues one of the Holy Knights with his Haki, and because of his Haki being there continuously, they can't regenerate, therefore they can defeat them. Something like that. Back to the actual kidnapping though. To begin with, I was on the side of that whole kidnapping plan being successful, although now I'm not so sure. I feel like even if it does fail, it still sends a very powerful message from the world government saying this is what we can do with 3 guys on their own. What would happen if we keep sending more and more and more? It could be like a catalyst that kind of forces the giants to wake the hell up. You know, this pacifism thing is not gonna work. Plus, if the kidnapping was successful, you don't see the giants just waiting around doing nothing. They would straight away hop in their boats and go after them. But then that would cut the arc short, unless someone is able to convince them not to rush in. And there is also the Loki problem that still needs to be resolved. And speaking of, and while all this was going on, we did cut to multiple locations across the island for 1 or 2 panels. The first one being Frankie, who defeated the Thunderstorm Nightmare with a radical beam, but the detail here is that Lily and Bonnie are now also being carried by Ripley, so maybe they had to evacuate that robot lab because of the lightning. But does that mean they are all heading down together to check on what's going on? Because I've talked about before a few chapters ago when they did reappear that it's better for them and their safety to stay up here, but I guess from their point of view in the story, they don't know what's happening and they don't know where is safe, so it's understandable they would think it would be better for them to regroup with the others for that safety. But I will assume that the lab is still standing because the Vegapunk clone would be in there, but also more importantly Kuma's body would be in there. And after that we see the guys who can make the biggest difference are still oblivious to the whole thing and they're basically having their own feast down below. And Luffy is not the only one who stuffed his face. Loki's also fat as well. He is morbidly obese too. It reminds me of Luffy and Hyogoro in Udon when they ate the red bean soup and they were in the sumo inferno. I mean, you wouldn't have expected anything less from Luffy. He's eating alongside someone who's been starved for a huge amount of time, and Luffy himself eats like someone who's been starved for a huge amount of time. And I'm almost definitely thinking too deeply into this, but the one thing just came to mind while I was reading. So I have a question, which is obviously the food gives him his his stamina and allows him to keep fighting. There was that elbaf food that Dorian Broggy gave him during the egghead arc, which really revitalized him, made from fermented shark, and they said it was an emergency ration. But what if elbaf creatures just in general are different to regular food? So this dinosaur meat ends up giving him insane levels of stamina, where he will just be able to keep it pushing in gear 5. He is eventually going to overcome the drawbacks like he did with all the other gears, so this could be a start. And the last cutaway is to the giant warrior pirates, where Dory and Broggy are cleaning house. They are cutting through these nightmares like they aren't even there. Let me tell you, there's a few things I'll keep mentioning as the arc goes on. The first one, maybe not so much because it may happen very soon, which is the ulti joining Yamato theory, and that could fully happen within the next 2 cover story pages. Another is claiming Kaido is Harald's son until proven otherwise, and the other is me fanboying over anything that Dory and Broggy do because I love those two with a burning passion. To the Walrus school now, where Killingham fought the teachers Ange and Principal Kiba, so an OAP who gets hurt when he launches his own attacks, and a language teacher who seems to be the one who best adapted to Harald's peaceful philosophy. So Killingham, I am sorry, but I'm not giving you any credit for this fight. This is basically bullying, ironic given that it was 2 teachers in a school, and he used a technique, sleep paralysis, on her. So that's another new ability of his. He's immobilized her completely, so he can do more than just manifest dreams. So maybe similar to Gunko's abilities in the sense that her powers encompass, or seem to encompass, every concept and use of arrows. Maybe it's the same with Killingham, who has multiple abilities that are based on different variations and ideas to do with sleep and such things. And he's getting ready for a broadcast that is most likely going to be Summers telling the giants who they are and what the heck is going on. So basically follow through with the kidnapping and blackmailing the giants into cooperating with them. And we end with the final Holy Knights member, Summers, who was fighting Saul, and this was a very one-sided fight because Saul is heavily injured here, and he tells Chopper and Robin to hide in his hair and save the kids later. So on the topic of those two, I've seen a lot of talk about their lack of action, first with the fire, even though I don't know what they could have done in the moment that wouldn't have resulted in the exact same outcome at the time, you know, getting hurt by the thorns just like Saul was himself. And now here with Summers, I don't see the issue with them not having fought because, and I can't remember if I've already said this, but I'm saying it again anyway, Saul is 100% stronger than both Chopper and Robin, and in my opinion stronger than them combined. Well, maybe that's a bit too far because there's Monster Point and Demonio Flare now, but anyway, he's a giant who was a Navy Vice Admiral with tangible evidence of him being able to use Haki, and aside from straight power, there was no reason for them to expose themselves and put themselves in danger, because I don't think Summers would have had a problem dealing with them on top of Saul either. We can't have everyone jumping into every fight when there's other stuff like the kids, which Saul mentioned, to be dealt with. Also, why the heck would Nico Robin be stupid enough to expose herself to one of the higher ups of the world government who've been trying to kill her entire life? That would just be ridiculous. Well, actually, I don't think they know these are Holy Knights yet, but regardless, my point still stands. She can never be too careful. And Chopper as a doctor, that's self-explanatory, you know, he's not expendable. And finally, one of the Holy Knights is catching on to the current state of Elbaf because Summers sees the school and the library and expresses his disappointment because these are giants we're talking about. They're supposed to be the most feared warriors in the world. What do you mean they have a school and a library? He also talks about how they're supposed to join them as mercenaries, so he was obviously expecting some heavy artillery. Although, to be fair, he still hasn't come into contact with the giant warrior pirates yet, and specifically Dory and Broggy, but he ends up cursing Harald, who messed up big time, and there we go. Surely now this is confirmation that Harald was in cahoots with the world government. So Gunko talking about whose side the giants will take during the war, it was most likely Harald's job to change the country enough to make that possible. The pacifism was maybe his idea of making the country easier to leash and easier to bring to heel, just as Shamrock said. So the first thing my mind goes to in that scenario is a comparison to Invincible. You know how Mark was supposed to get Earth ready for the Viltrum Empire's arrival? Could it have been Harald's job to get Elbaf ready for the world government's arrival? However, and okay, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but this still is not enough for me to say King Harald was 100% bad. There's still the possibility that the pacifism was actually his own idea that came from a place of honesty and sincerity, but that also made him extremely naive, and the world government took advantage of it and used him without him realizing. So that could work with Loki Loki killing him, because if Harald truly believed he was doing a good thing by aligning with the world government and Loki found out about it, it would mean that there could have still been a major disagreement between them, even if Harald wasn't outright bad, which escalated to Loki killing his father, because even though Harald would only ever have had good intentions in this case, Loki knew it would only damage elbaph massively. And it makes sense for Sommers to say Harald messed up, because maybe Loki killing his father meant whatever they were planning back then couldn't be fully implemented, with their inside agent, who didn't even know himself he was an inside agent, being killed before that. This arc just feels different because every previous arc has had that climactic end fight, like Doflamingo, Katakuri, Kaido, the Elders, and the Holy Knights fit that job description as well. But this is happening very early on in the arc, and I can't see any other big bad showing up later on. To be honest, it's very hard for me to view the elbaph arc in isolation, so whenever I think about where this arc will go, I think about how it's gonna affect the bigger picture, and then my brain just malfunctions because there's too much to keep track of. And I'm also thinking about what Gerd said about Loki's recovery time being several months. Loki's surely gonna be fully recovered and at 100% during the final war, so if it does end up taking him several months to recover, that's just a lot of time for a lot to happen. I know there's already the idea of a second time skip, so how does that sound? Instead of them being separated to train on their own, they train all together on elbaph.